Next, we'll talk about communication skills, desired, less desired, common or less common, and then we'll move on to communication apprehension. So, whenever we enter the workplace, especially over the past few decades, the skills required for jobs often have to do with communication. There are more common and less common skills and competencies, and there are more desired and less desired communication skills and competencies. So, interestingly, and you can see in this graph that is also in your book, or in this figure rather, that's also in your book, are skills and competencies that are, let's start with at the bottom, more common and more desired. Analytical thinking, this can be critical thinking, processing, cognitively working to work out problems, and the ability to work collaboratively are very important. They're very desired and they're common among a lot of people. So, especially when you're on the job market, you want to highlight these skills that you have. So then we have less common and more desired, and I hope it's okay that I'm working from the bottom up. It seems more fluid to me that way. So if you feel like you are strong in these skill sets whenever you're on the job market, whenever you're interviewing, etc., you might consider highlighting these, and I hope you can see my mouse while I'm doing this, these skills and competencies as you're talking to your future employers or your current employers about what sets you apart, right? So, strategic thinking, how to solve problems, problem solving. So, thinking outside of the box, coming up with ideas that might be new, leadership skills and communication skills interpersonally as well, and in group settings. So all of those are more desired, less common among our general population. It depends too on where you're working. I know all of you are across various fields. You might be going into academia, you might be going into business, you might be an entrepreneur, all of those things. So if you are an entrepreneur, even these are the skills that are something to look for in your future employees. The less common, less desired, the industry related work experience, even though this is the weird thing, even though a lot of job calls will highlight this as like requirements, they're more most of the time interested in these communication skills that you might have. This industry related work experience is important. However, it's not the most important thing to most organizations and most companies. Also, adaptability. This, I think of it as like a going with the flow kind of thing. That's not necessarily a desired or even common um, attribute. So consider that while you're on this job market. Additionally, and lastly, our more common, less desired. There are more of these, and I find that really interesting. So, risk taking, and we see this a lot with entrepreneurship, which is in the same skill set and competencies. Um, but if you're trying to get a job at a larger organization as an entry level employee or mid level employee, these aren't really skills that they're looking for. Decision making, a lot of bureaucracies, and that just refers to the rules of the organization in various ways, including culture, but like rules that have to be followed, don't require decision making. And they do, like, if you look back down to the ability to work collaboratively, we like making group decisions, right? This global mindset. There are a lot of buzzwords surrounding that we'll talk about later in this, not this unit, but later down in the course. And also quantitative skills. Quantitative just refers to numbers. And again, depending on your chosen path with whichever organization or your own, this can be really important. If you're a like CPA, for example, or if you're in finance, quantitative skills is um, an important asset to have. However, if you're in a different field that's not strictly focused on numbers, it's not as desired. So then motivation and drive, we can talk about ambition all day, but that's like kind of not quantifiable, which is interesting given the last point. But if you're really motivated and you're really driven, that's great, but that's not necessarily something that they're looking for. They're really looking for these qualities down at the bottom right corner of this figure. Moving forward, let's talk about communication apprehension, because this can happen in the workplace, and I'm sure it's happened in your classrooms. So, and I know we have a lot of students I love these online courses because we have different students from different disciplines, different stages of their academic career, returning students, etc. So we can apply this to a lot of different contexts, but many of you might have had some communication apprehension in the classroom. And just to break down like the definition of communication apprehension, there is one in your book, so if you want to refer to that, you can. But it's basically that nervousness or anxiety that accompanies communicating with others. This can be in the form of, a lot of times, this is in the form of public speaking, but that's not always the case. So if we look at the figure in the bottom left, we see the different types of communication apprehension. If you are someone who is kind of anxious and nervous in social settings about talking and communicating with others, it seems awkward, it seems like a job, that's more in line with trait communication apprehension, meaning like that's just part of who you are. Then you might identify as an introvert if that's the case. This is where I kind of fall in communication apprehension, personally. But then we have context-based communication apprehension, which is slightly different than situational communication apprehension, where context-based communication apprehension is like, you might be really outgoing in social settings, but if you are having to give a public speech, then there's some anxiety and nervousness revolving around that. Whereas situational communication apprehension, it's like you might be okay with giving public speeches. You do it all the time. You talk to, this is also, you might teach a class even, and you feel very comfortable doing that. But if you have like a job interview coming up, or if you have an audition, then that makes you nervous and anxious. That's more of an example of situational communication apprehension. And then there's audience-based communication apprehension. So if you've ever been in a room with people who make you nervous because of maybe their status, maybe their dissimilarities, which we have these causes over here that could impact all of these. But, and I've just pointed at the screen like you can see me. I'm sorry, I do that sometimes. I use my hands a lot. But if we have some sort of apprehension about the audience that we're speaking to, like if they're going to take this information well, or if they're going to might be combative about the information, that's more audience-based communication apprehension. We have all these causes to your right, including novelty. This is like the newness of the idea. Is this a lot of, and we'll talk about public speaking later, but a lot of students like doing novel speeches or around novel ideas that they feel passionate about. However, sometimes it's like, oh, am I reading the room correctly? And then formality is another cause of this. You might be fine if I had the first good presentation I ever gave was after many bad ones. And it was because I like did not have to dress up. I did not feel I could wear my glasses. I didn't have to feel that formality. I just was who I was without the formalness, without the business attire. And then I was like, oh, I can do this, right? So then your peer evaluation. Sometimes talking in front of your peers causes the worst apprehension. Like you can talk in front of a group full of strangers, but whenever you are in front of your friends or family, that makes it really hard too. This might not be the case for you. These are just some causes. Dissimilarity of the audience, definitely kind of spoke to that already. And then this idea of all eyes on you. You're the center of attention. And sometimes we love that and sometimes we hate that. So that's referred to as conspicuousness. Then also lack of attention. So this can be from the audience if you're receiving that nonverbal feedback, which we'll get into next, the nonverbal things. Then that can cause you to get even more nervous. And also your prior history. If you've given 100 speeches in your life, then you're probably more or less anxious about it. If you're doing it for the first time, you're probably more anxious about it. So moving forward, I think we're getting into chapter 2 next that talks about verbal and nonverbal communication, and that will be on the next video.